と足遅かったようだね。伝説の魔境は私たちトランプがいただくよ。
いただくで。いただきます。
There's something to be said about first impressions, and when it comes to video games, that first impression certainly starts with the packaging. Back in the day, we didn't have magazines or YouTube videos or Let's Plays that told us what games to play or what they looked like. We had to rely on the packaging, and it's been a bit of a lost art form to have just fantastic and great packaging. But maybe someone at Psikyo or whoever put out this system works actually remember the time of great video game packaging with compelling designs, and they brought out this box here, this collector's box for the Psikyo Collection Volume 3. If we look at the box here in closer detail, we'll notice first of all just this huge piece of art that is on the front page in a very nice and discreet Psikyo Collection text up in the corner here. The reason it doesn't say Psikyo Collection Volume 3, even though it contains Volume 3, is that this is a box that is intended for you to compile your 3 games or store all 3 games in one. Of course, the previous games have been released in standard packaging like this, also with amazing artwork from each of the Psikyo shooters on the cards. And if you don't know much about Psikyo, this is a developer who primarily in the 90s put out a ton of really great shoot 'em ups and sexy mahjong games. Of course, this collection only contains the shoot 'em ups, which is a good thing, because even as sexy as mahjong might look, I still don't know how to play those types of games. If we start by looking at what's on 1 and 2 of these collections here, before we move on to this just huge box, we have some legendary shooters here in film of Strikers 1945, Gumpert, Samurai Aces, Soul Divide, Strikers 1945 Part 2, Gumpert 2, which is probably one of my favorite shooters ever, Tengai Blade, Tengai Sengoku Blade, which this artwork is from, and Dragon Blaze. Now, just looking at the box here, you know that you instantly got a great Psikyo game, as it features probably one of the most iconic characters from the whole of the Psikyo shoot 'em up universe, named Miko, who's known for her iconic design, as she of course is a shrine maiden with flying goggles. Extremely interesting combination. And she also has huge boobs. But well, let's look at what's inside the box. Opening up the box, we are first presented with an art book, and simply moving that art book, who has incredibly art in front, moving that art book out of the way, we can tell we're in for a treat. A kind of very tasteful and just amazing way to really represent these Psikyo shoot 'em up games. Looking at the art book, it's nice to finally get a physical one. Many of these games have been released before on the Dreamcast and the PlayStation 2. Some of them featuring digital art books, but here we have a nice physical book. Sengoku Blade here, more Sengoku Blade, again with the iconic Miko here. Some other characters that you shouldn't really play as, and of course this character, who I don't remember the name of, but he obviously looks like a very extremely playable character. June is her name. Now, looking through the book, it's obviously that it's just from the Sengoku Blade and Sengoku Aces series of games, and even though those are very interesting games to look at, it can be said that it would be nice to have seen some artwork from some of the other Psikyo games. I would like to see some more of Gumpert, as it's one of my favorite shooters ever made. But it is some very nice art who is on display just in this book. Moving on deeper into the collection, you see here on top we have a box that says Psikyo Collection Volume 1, 2 and 3, and this is your storage box for all the games, which comes with the Psikyo Collection Volume 3 Switch game inside. Let's take a look at that. We have Strikers 1945, Sengoku Cannon and Zero Gunner. The final game here is Gumpert, a very late game, 2001 game, most of the other ones being from the 90s. And this is more of a sort of a puzzler game, but also a very interesting game, and for the first time ever released outside the arcade on the Nintendo Switch. If we remove more of the packaging here, we'll see there's a surprise item under this cover here, and this is a mouse mat, which mouse mats are traditionally used for computers and for PC gaming, but here you get one which has very nicely detailed, just like the artwork on the front, completely black on the side for more rubbery backside for a better grip. Moving the packaging aside, we've got a very nice surface where it's easy to remove stains, and just a very great way to rest your wrist here as you play hardcore shoot 'em ups. Before we move on to how it actually works playing shoot 'em ups in this way, let's look at the final thing inside, which are some alternate covers here for the games included on this cartridge, Volume 3 here. You can put an alternate cover in which displays Strikers 1945, Sengoku Cannon, Gumpert, or Zero Gunner 2. Let's try and get this stuff out of the way here and try out and see just how much better you'll be playing games with a solid wrist like this on your Nintendo Switch. Of course, resting your wrists while playing these games while holding onto the console isn't the most convenient or comfortable way to play. It's not like playing with a mouse, but it does have another great use. You detach the Joy-Cons. Well, normally you'll use a flip grip or something, but if you turn the mouse pad around you can tilt. It's a great way to rest your Switch and tilt the game a little bit as you played using the controller's free hand. Fun for hours, but let's hook this console up to the television and take a closer look at some of the great games across all three cartridges. If we start with Volume 1, we have Soul Divide, which is probably the most esoteric game in the collection. And when I played it for the first time, I actually didn't like it very much, mostly because of the graphics. There's just something about pre-rendered graphics which I've never really enjoyed. Didn't like it in Donkey Kong Country and don't really like it here. It always felt kind of cheap to me, just being able to model a character in 3D and then pose him around and take screenshots, rather than hand drawing each individual frame. But you know, playing for a while, the graphics kind of grew on me. What I would really have loved to see though was some scan lines. And this is as good a place as any to talk about the rather limited options in these Psikyo games on the Switch, because they initially boot up in kind of a blur mode, blur filter, and you want to go into the display options and usually change this to type 1 or something similar that just turns it off and gives you the raw, pure pixels. And while there also is a scanline option, it only displays blur and scan lines, and that's not the look you want. That looks more like a composite cable to a CRT monitor and doesn't really give you that pure, crisp look that modern retro gamers are used to. But in every other game in the collection, I'd say that just the pure, crisp pixels are nice as well, without the scan lines. And this generation has been a lot better than that than the two previous generations, which just love putting blur filters on every retro game release. So what is it that makes this game so different? Well, it's a horizontal shooter that puts a bit of melee combat into the mix. Not just as an option as in you see it in other shooting games, but several enemies will appear right up in your grill and not move out of the way until they have been dispatched. And learning how to do the melee combat and pull off the combos, which are a little bit different for each character, is quintessential, because unlike just shooting them, hitting them with melee attacks will stun them a bit and knock them out of their attack, and that's definitely a technique you need to master to survive. The trickiest bit is that while you're concentrating on fighting enemies in hand-to-hand combat, you still have other enemies shooting at you, rather relentlessly as well. And even though you have a pretty generous hit bar, the hitbox is the entire character, so you have to move around quite a lot to avoid getting hit. The game also has spells. As you hit enemies, you will slowly charge up your magic gauge, and throughout the game you will find new spells, ranging from offensive to defensive spells, and each character has a unique spell that does a pretty effective job at taking down the big bosses, of which there are plenty of. There's also a branching path system. You at least get one choice where you can choose to chase after the enemy or go looking for reinforcements. But as far as I could tell, it didn't really change anything other than the order in which you were playing the stages. But I'm not super good at this game yet, haven't completed it or anything, so maybe there's multiple endings depending on your choice. Samurai Ace, or Sengoku Ace Tengai Episode 1 as it's known in Japan, is our first vertically scrolling shoot 'em up in the collection, and the first game in Psikyo's popular Sengoku series. And this was designed by Shin Nakamura, who you might have known as the creator of the Arrow Fighters series, aka Sonic Wings, and the founder of Psikyo. And you can definitely feel that this is something that really went on to become the hallmark of Psikyo. These games where they have just a solid roster of characters that all play very differently and have a bit of a comedy angle to them, even though it's not a comedy game. For instance, one of the endings for the character Flash, who's also called Ein in Japan, well, his whole motivation for going through the game was that he was looking for his missing sister, and in the ending he discovers that she was just out shopping and came home with cheeseburgers for him. The gameplay is also pretty straightforward. You have a normal shot, you have a charge shot, and you have a bomb. I will say that the charge shot, well, the charging process for that shot is quite long, a little bit longer than it feels like in other similar games, even in similar Psikyo games. Now, it is individual per character, but it certainly is a long enough charge for it to feel that it's not really worth it. That you're better off just trying to avoid enemies, and on the Switch version just use your auto shot. Power-ups are also quintessential as usual, and this is another staple of the Psikyo games with no alternate weapon drops, but just power-ups that will evolve your weapon, at least for some of the characters, to have homing capabilities. Unlike some other shooters, primarily from Konami, you don't feel completely boned even though you die and have to start over on collecting power-ups. And if you're quick, you can get at least one power-up right after your death, so that's good. I will say that it feels exceedingly difficult to pick up power-up with the Turbo Monk Tengai, which despite his name is actually a rather slow character. One thing he does have over other characters is that his bomb does work quite like a get out of jail free card. You know, if you're about to be hit, you can always smart bomb your way out, and while the holy tomboy Miko moves a lot faster, her bombs doesn't work that way. There's like half a second delay before they go off and block all incoming shots in a nice square. Now if we move on to Gumpert, we get another shoot 'em up series with its own poster girl, just like Miko. Here her name is Marion, she's a flying witch, and in traditional Psikyo style she is surrounded by a roster of other interesting characters, each with their own style and combat methods. What I loved about the Gumpert series is kind of the interplay between the characters and the villains. It's a villain group called the Trump, which has kind of the typical Japanese Duranjo setup of two dumb guys, a big one and a small one, this one called Ace and Claude, and then the sexy female leader, here called Rouge. And throughout the game they will always be one step ahead of you and act as the bosses, with their crazy robot designs for the major part of the stages. Another interesting thing about Gumpert and the game's design is that the stage order is random. It's not like other shooters where you slowly try to master the game by having to play through the boring stages you already know how to do. Here the order is sort of random, but there are some stage combinations which are considerably more dangerous than others. If you're good enough to get through a loop, you start having enemy bullets which are considerably faster and even more dangerous. Depending on the characters you choose, even in 2-player, the game just has a ton of different cutscenes where the characters will chat back and forth, and with all the combinations you have 21 different endings. So there's a lot to aim for in Gumpert. This first game is a pretty straightforward affair. You have a shot, bomb, charge shot, but an interesting difference is that you don't die if you fly into an enemy. Not while you have power-ups at least. You just lose a power-up and it'll start flying off screen. And if you're out of power-ups, you start losing your bombs. And usually there's way more shots than enemies on screen to be worried about, but it is a tactical consideration. Do I want to try and avoid these shots by nudging myself into an enemy? Well, in Gumpert you can do just that. Now the final game on Volume 1 is Strikers 1945, not to be confused with Capcom's 1945 series of shoot 'em up games, even though they do look quite similar on the surface, since they're both set in World War II. Like of the rest of the Psikyo games, you get a nice diverse selection of planes with their own shot patterns, their own bombs and their own charge shot. And this is the game where the charge shot really comes into it, right? It's quite a powerful form of attack. For instance, there's this plane here where your charge shot will shoot out cannons that will kind of lock onto any enemy on the screen and shoot on them until they are destroyed, or until the charge runs out at least. And this is probably also a good time to mention the staple of Psikyo games, the length of each stage. These are very short stages compared to shoot 'em up games from other companies. Many of them can be played through in just 2 to 3 minutes. So if you're a shoot 'em up interested retro gamer with limited time on your hands, maybe you're a father or have a busy job, then I think Psikyo games are the games for you, as playing them is a very fast ordeal. An interesting thing about the Strikers 1945 series is that it's also Psikyo's kind of Metroid series. Not gameplay wise, it doesn't have anything to do with the gameplays. No, I'm talking about the ending. When you go through the game you get a picture of your pilot, and depending just how effectively you were playing, it will be revealed that most of the pilots are in fact women. In the arcade version they're actually even more scantily clad, and if you play very well you're rewarded with these pictures that also gives you their measurements. There's also guest appearance, as the pilot of the Shinden J7 is the same Einzelmann as appears in Samurai Aces, so that's a nice little Easter egg. But this is probably the only remotely comedic bits about Strikers 1945, as it's not much of a comedy series. It's more serious, it's more military, it's more tactical, using real planes, flying around in a real war, shooting real guns with real consequences. let's move on to Psikyo Shooting Collection Volume 2 and straight into Strikers 1945 Part 2. This time you get no sexy endings, but you do get some more powerful planes, some more dangerous enemies, and an interesting new system to the charge shot mechanic. See, now the charge shot charges its power as you defeat enemies, it charges it over 3 levels, and it's much faster to fire off. And while you do have a gauge on the bottom of the screen where you can keep track on your current level of charge shot, there's also a small audio cue every time you hit a new level. And you'll need that because you really need to stay focused on these enemies. They shoot a lot of bullets at you. But now would probably could be a good time to talk about the difficulty levels of all these games. They start on normal level, but they have quite a range of difficulty levels to choose from, all the way up to hard and down to easy and baby and even way down to games journalist. But this will obviously impact your score, and I'm pretty sure you won't get an ending either unless you play on normal. The only complaint I probably have about Strikers 1945 Part 2, as it is a really good game, is the kind of 3D font choices they have on the plain select screen. I mean, this screams 90s. But other than that, hey, great game and a worthy sequel to Strikers 1945. While we're at it with sequels, let's talk Gumpert 2. This is another iteration which just does a fantastic job on making everything better. Better graphics, better music. I even think the costume designs on the rival trumps is way better this time around. It's the same plot about gathering stuff to get a wish granted. This time it's the elements rather than pieces of a mirror. But you also get multiple endings. As before, like Strikers 1945 Part 2, Gumpert 2 also introduces the charge gauge, filling up as you defeat enemies and giving you access to a more powerful charge shot. But unique to Gumpert 2 is that there are also a melee attack button, where you can expend some of your charge gauge for a powerful but risky up-close attack. Ein from Samurai Aces and Strikers 1945 also makes a return as a secret character. If you go to the random select and hold down before pressing the fire button, you'll unlock him. One unfortunate omission from the Switch version, who is only present as a secret character in the Dreamcast version, is Morrigan from Darkstalkers fame, and her you unlock by pressing up and fire on the random character select. But yeah, Gumpert 2 is just a great game. It's the whole package of everything coming together, and if you have to buy just one Psikyo game on the Nintendo eShop, I recommend this one. Another game here on Volume 2 is also Dragon Blaze, and this is finally a great way to own this game, as it is one of the very expensive games to purchase if you're looking to buy either the arcade board or the standalone version on the PlayStation 2. I think a lot of Gumpert carries over into this game, but honestly there are quite a few more systems than my pea-brain can kind of revolve itself around. I mean, you got a shot button, you got a bomb button. You also got kind of a charge shot button, but instead of a charge shot, it will fire off super magic, expending your magic gauge if you hold down the shot button. But not only that, you also have a button labeled the dragon button, and this button is used to send out your mount, your steed, the dragon you are flying around on. You can send him up the screen a little bit and then just shoot in the straight direction on his own, while you concentrate on flying around and shooting weaker shots. And this is obviously a great tactic to defeat bosses by sending your dragon in. But when your dragon is out, your bomb button and magic charge shot button also acts quite differently. So if you're really tactical, sending out the dragon against regular enemies also has some uses. Like the bomb will be way more effective at having a screen clearing effect. But if you're a player like me who are using the bomb button as a panic button to get out of jail, then it probably won't do you much good. This is definitely a shoot 'em up for the professional. But yeah, it's a visually compelling game, one of the very late releases in the year 2000, with just stunning graphics and sound, and just all-round compelling presentation that really makes me wanna try and get better at understanding the game. Getting back to sequels, here's Sengoku Blade, also known as Tengai outside Japan. Here they switch from a vertical to a horizontal shooting game, which really is a great idea to differentiate it from many of Psikyo's other shooting games. Again, you got a diverse set of characters with diverse skills and attacks. Some have very effective charge attacks, some have very effective bombs, and others just move really fast around the screen, which necessarily isn't always in your favor, as you might accidentally fly into enemy bullets. But out of any of the games in the Sengoku series, this is probably my favorite, mostly because it just looks great. It has these beautiful hand-drawn graphics, huge bosses and short stages just as you've gotten used to in all the Psikyo games by now. Unlike the other sequels, they didn't introduce any form of charge gauge, but instead some of the characters have charge attacks that will change and improve as you pick up more power-ups. Unlike Soul Divide, your entire character isn't your hitbox this time around, but that is also pretty reasonable and fair, considering that all hits are one-hit deaths and you don't have a health bar like you do in Soul Divide. New horizontal style also helps improve the character design in some very big ways, but in general I just think it helps to give them a really nice side view, which make them more distinct while playing. As always, the game also has a bunch of crazy endings, and also co-op endings depending on the characters you chose. For instance, if you play as Tengai and Katana, well then the robot Katana will turn into a woman at the end of the game, and Tengai will insist that she dresses up as a schoolgirl. Yes, these are the kind of monks we are dealing with in Sengoku Blade.
女じゃったか。
悪いか。
悪かない。だが、女がそんな地味な着物ではいかんな。これを着てみろ。
なんだこれは。変な着物だな。最近の流行りか。
いや、純粋にわしの趣味じゃが。
おいおい、なんだ天外。全然推しになってないぞよ。
So for the final volume of the Psikyo Shooting Collection, Volume 3, we move straight into Strikers 1945, Part 3. This game also goes by the name Strikers 1999, and with good reason, because it moves out of the World War II setting into a more modern combat setting. Well, I do say modern, but that's like 20 years ago by now. As usual, you got a host of different planes with different abilities. You got your normal shot, you got your bomb attack, and you get your charge shot, which also works on a charge meter like in some of the previous Psikyo games. I would say it works a little bit closer to Dragon Blaze actually. You don't hold it down to charge up an attack, you just hold it down and it will expend your stored up charge attack power without you having to wait. Very convenient and gets way more actual use than you would in the first Strikers 1945. This is also one of those shoot 'em ups where your score can be radically influenced on how you play. It's not just about shooting enemies, as some of the enemies will drop medals that you need to pick up, and a special feature is that some of the bosses have a blue core that they will expose for a second or two, and if you're able to get right up on them, the core will turn red and you can take them down in a single blow. Not only is that a fast way to defeat bosses, it also adds a technical bonus to your score, which is critical if you really want to move up those leaderboards. here is Sengoku Cannon, aka Sengoku Ace Part 3. And this is the first game in the collection that wasn't an arcade game first, but a wholly original sequel that appeared on the PlayStation Portable. And this is actually kind of a detriment to it, I think. I mean, the 3D backgrounds they've done this time around just look absolutely terrible, blown up on a huge television. But what can you do? I'd personally wish for a more hand-drawn game, but realizing the time and how shoot-'em-up games in general were doing at the time, I can't blame them for going this route, although it does look very cheap. But if you can look past that, there's actually some pretty interesting evolution to the gameplay side. You got your normal attack, you got your bombs, you got a power shot that does a lot more damage but moves you around slower on the screen, which actually can be quite helpful against bosses and more precisely dodge around big projectile patterns. But you also got something called the cannon shot. This is a big projectile that does a bunch of damage, but more importantly it turns enemy projectiles on screen into yen coins and much needed bonus points. So this is another shooter where you really gotta think and adapt and manipulate things in a way to get the absolute best score. The game is also fully voice acted, you know, originally being a PSP game and they had to fill out that UMD with something, and since they didn't bother with the graphics they went for the voice acting instead. And as far as I can tell, the PSP game was a Japan exclusive, so the fact that it's now on the Switch means that we can finally enjoy the plot in good old English. Smashing. Unfortunately, I don't really feel like it has the same pedigree as the other Sengoku games. The frame rate of the background can make it a little bit too tricky to see enemy bullets, and playing it really just makes me want to play more of Sengoku Blade instead. But speaking from a preservationist standpoint, it's nice that it's on this collection and not just hidden away on the Japanese PlayStation Portable library.
あんたとこうして会うのもこれで3度目か、小より。久しぶりに遊んでやるよ。それ、暗いな。暗いな。暗いな。それ、それ、それ、それ、暗いな。臨場機動車開始熱帯大。これはどうだ。臨場装置車開始熱帯大。それなかなかやるようだね。
It's a very interesting game as part of the collection Zero Gunner 2, or rather Zero Gunner 2 Minus for Nintendo Switch. Because you see, while the game does exist in the arcades and on the Dreamcast, Zero Div have lost all of the source code and just had to completely rebuild the game almost from scratch. So that's why they added a bit of a minus to the title, just out of respect for the original game. This is probably the most original playing of Psikyo's shoot-'em-up games, being an omnidirectional helicopter game, which isn't a dual joystick game as you might think from looking at the gameplay here. No, what you do is that you hold down a button to spawn a targeting reticule on the screen, and this is the point that you kind of turn your helicopter around. I guess it's a little bit tricky to explain, but once you play it yourself it just sort of immediately makes sense. This time your super weapon, you don't have a bomb, but you have a super weapon that charges up. This is charged from small energy pellets that you get from the enemies, who drop them when defeated. As they are defeated, they are flung in your general direction across the screen, but if you let go of the fire button or the weird anchor button, you'll kind of magnetically attract all the energy pellets and power-ups on the screen. And this of course means that you can't just hold down the fire button and dump like you do in all the other shooting games. Pretty tricky. Like the Gumpert games, you also get your levels in a random order, the first 4 at least. And again, being a Psikyo game, you get your nice and short levels, which means that it's never boring to play. Now, thinking about just how much the developer was willing to put in time and effort to completely rebuild the game from scratch, just for putting it on the Switch, I guess that really speaks to just how much of a shoot-'em-up console the Switch is. It's an absolute dream platform for retro gamers, in my opinion. The final game on Volume 3 is Gumpert. This is the only game that is not some kind of shooter, and it's not a sexy mahjong game either. This is actually a breakout clone starring Marion of Gumpert fame. Much like something like Concannon, you got a steady stream of power-ups, such as a multi-ball and projectiles, but rather than controlling a paddle back and forth, you actually have a set of levers to control here, which can be used to knock the ball around and have it move faster. Later in the game you also have enemies that start shooting projectiles down toward the bottom of the screen, which you can knock back at them, but if their attack hits the bottom of the screen, it will create a lightning bolt that will stun you for a couple of seconds if you run into it. You also get a fun little boss fight every couple of stages, and yeah, overall I think this is a pretty fun little Arcanoid clone and a nice game to finish out this massive Psikyo Collection. And speaking of massive, you will have massive amounts of fun playing all these games, assuming you are a shoot 'em up fan of course. As always, thank you for watching, thank you for subscribing, an extra big thank you to all my Patreons who are supporting my channel with as little as $1 a month, which you can too by following the link below the video.